producing a vector image. In Illustrator, I'm going to kind of show you what a vector image really is and some good examples to look at. So File, New, OK, then go into Window, Symbols. There's a million symbols. If you can go into Symbol, you'll find bugs, flowers, all kinds of crazy stuff, and you can drag these elements out. Okay. I'm going to use the bow. And I'm going to go to Edit Symbol. I'm going to zoom in and use the Direct Selection tool to show you the makeup of this vector image. These are elements stacked on top of each other. Now the artist could have drawn these out individually, which is probably the case, and then just stacked them in an order that they needed to go. Now, this way is very tedious. It's obsolete too. In my humble opinion, it's obsolete. All right. So I don't usually draw in Illustrator. Going over here and using the path tool to produce a shape is probably like the last thing I want to do in my life. Or the blob tool, which, is great in all sense of regard to being a blob, and I really like having it as a tool. It's just, again, to produce these simple shapes and stack them on top of each other, it's just not my way of drawing. So, I'm going to close this document out and just open a new one and hit OK. I'm going to jump over to the Photoshop for a second. And I'm going to go File, New. I'm going to use Web. Use always a low-res image if you're going to work this workflow. Take a brush, choose a hard edge brush, 29% opacity, and then I'm going to choose a color. Let's say, I don't care, let's say this blue. But I'm going to make it so I can have the ability to go over to the highest saturation point. I'm going to use HSB sliders to do this. And I'm going to make sure it's in the CMYK spectrum. Okay, here, I'm going to take this and draw out a ball. Okay, then I'm going to rank it up just a little bit. And then a little bit more. Okay, and I could touch it up as I needed. I could use Alt to steal color, and I can start blending these. Don't blend it too much, though. I found that if you blend it too much, it doesn't work quite well. Things that you can do is, like, if you want to trim out the outside edge, you can just grab a eraser with a hard edge and just kind of trim this up a little bit. So I want that look of having stacked color, and I don't want to make them in a vector. This is an option. I just take this and edit, copy it, and edit, paste it. Notice it doesn't come out the same, but that's okay. Remember, I'm just trying to produce that shape with the separations. Here, I can use Live Trace. Now, under Live Trace, there are some options. Here, I have the ability to use color, for example, and the amount of color, and I can hit preview. Okay, as I lower this down, I get less and less color, but I get that stacked look. Now the trick is to get it saturated enough for them to separate. So let's look at that just real quick back in Photoshop. So here, I could choose a really, really bright blue, or I can just choose to make this the brighter blue. Edit, copy. Let's get rid of this one. Edit, paste it back in. So this one should live trace a little bit better. Let's go into trace options right off the bat and choose preview, 6 color, and you can see now the elements are there. Okay, let's hit trace. Now, if I want to edit the different pieces of it, I can just hit expand. Okay. If I want to add more to it, like let's say I take the direct selection tool and click this middle part, okay? I could then go to the blob tool and design it a little bit further if I needed to. But at least I have that starting shape and the starting color and everything else. Again, always use the direct selection tool to select it. That way you get the color, and then you can go back over to the blob tool to blob in more color. You can also choose to trim off elements, like this one right here, for example. Maybe I don't want this outside edge. I can use the direct selection tool to select it, and then I can use the eraser tool to erase it off. Okay. The hardest thing I find is the fact that these elements are stacked so close together. So what I do is take it and separate them via layers, 2, 3. So I put the brightest blue element, which is using the direct selection tool, and I'll select that and drag it to the top. Okay. And I'll see what happens. I got this one, good. Now if I deselect that one, I have these. And I'll separate these out by the color they are, just like this. This outside edge, I don't want. I can use the other selection tool to get rid of it. So now I have this, which is something I kind of wanted to begin with. I'm going to show you one more thing that you can do. Let's say I like these elements together. There's 2 separate elements. Well, what I can do is go Object, Rasterize. Choose High 3 ppi, and then hit Live Trace again. And use Color. There we go. So now I have that element, and it's one giant element. I can expand it, and there I have my element that I need. There might be this little white edge. You can use the direct selection tool to get rid of it, or in the trace options we'll look at later on, using trace options to ignore white. So if you want to put color elements together, that's how it's done. So I know this is basic and it's a ball, but any student can do a ball, so that's why I chose it. Now I want you to kind of look at what you would produce, but I would look at the different libraries. Look at the symbols, edit them, tear them apart. You can see this one. This one's a little bit more complex in the fact that it has gradients. Okay. Look how many different elements there are. There's this bigger one. There's a littler one. There's a littler one. That would have been a lot of work to draw all these elements out. There's no doubt about it. Something I don't have the time for. But that's a different way to do it in Photoshop. You can just draw out the elements as individual, but use a gradient and then trace it out. That variation of color in Photoshop from one shade to the next will separate it quite nicely. So that is producing something in Illustrator, but using Photoshop. Enjoy.